In the words of a random person I saw on my Twitter feed a few days ago, I hate British people. As an American patriot myself, I cannot help but agree wholeheartedly with that sentiment. I mean, the British have done nothing but bad. They caused a famine in Bangladesh, they colonized Africa, brutally suppressing dissent, they even had the gall to tax our tea. How unforgivable. But one of the more lasting legacies of the British in our own country might just be ingrained in our system of electing our representatives in government, which potentially might prevent us from being truly represented in our government today.
Hail Columbia, happy land. Hail ye heroes.
What are single-member districts? Generally speaking, single-member districts are constituencies, or geographic areas of a larger body, that are represented by a single office holder in a legislative body, such as a Congress or a state legislature. In this system, voters in each district elect one representative to serve their area, and in America, our districts tend to be as close in population to each other as possible. Now, this concept may seem straightforward at first, but once you dig a bit, it's not too hard to see where problems arise. Candidates that win single-member districts may be able to represent the constituency itself pretty well, having been elected typically by a majority or at the very least a plurality within the district. But once you zoom outside of the district and view the legislative body or nation as a whole, that it becomes an issue. These districts are winner take all, meaning that each district has just one seat and it's all up for grabs. Whether you win it with 51% of the vote or 99% of the vote, it does not matter. It all ends up as winning that one seat. In districts where one party has a pretty solid chance of winning the seat, votes for losing candidates in a district are in effect wasted, as they do not contribute to the election of a winning representative. Votes for the winning candidate, beyond what was actually necessary to win in the first place, are also wasted, as they are not necessary. Again, you could win with 51% or 99%, and it doesn't matter, and that's a big difference. For example, in a hypothetical scenario where Party A wins many districts by very narrow margins, and Party B wins fewer districts, but by incredibly large margins, Party A could end up with more seats in the legislature despite receiving fewer total votes nationwide. This outcome would not proportionally reflect the overall voter preferences across the country, and this has happened many times. For instance, let's look at 2012 for the United States House of Representatives. In that election, Democrats got nearly 49% of the vote nationwide, with Republicans getting 47.7%. However, Republicans won 54% of the seats, and Democrats 46%. Republicans won a majority. Now, you can chalk the sum of this up to gerrymandering, or the intentional drawing of these districts to favor one party or the other. But gerrymandering is also a natural byproduct of the single-member district system. Its power would be diminished without single-member districts. The winner-take-all nature in single-member districts allows gerrymandering to thrive, but the important thing to note is that even in a system where gerrymandering is effectively non-existent, the results can still be disproportional because of the wasted vote effect discussed before. In Canada, the Liberal Party under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has lost the national popular vote nationwide twice in a row to the Conservative Party, yet have won more seats in the House of Commons than the Conservatives twice in a row, allowing Trudeau to remain Prime Minister while only receiving 32% of the vote in the last election to the Conservatives' 34%. This happened because in Western Canada and rural Canada, Conservatives ran up the numbers running these districts with nearly 80 or 90% of the vote, while in the metropolitan areas around Toronto and Montreal, the Liberals managed to win very narrow victories. So they lost the popular vote, but they still got to win the legislature. The single-member district system, combined with the winner-take-all nature of their elections, can result in a national legislature that does not accurately represent the diverse political views of the electorate as a whole, where viewpoints can be entirely shunned due to just being geographically spread out instead of concentrated in specific areas. At the start, I mentioned Britain, and although I normally frown upon discussing those people, they're essential to the story of how we got here. Following the ratification of the Magna Carta in 1215, which prevented King John of England and all future monarchs from raising taxes without representation of the nobility in the form of a parliament, parliaments began meeting regularly. It was from the Model Parliament of 1295 that set the stage for many, quote, boroughs, electing members of parliament by a majority vote, starting the tradition of winner-take-all district-based elections that would be imported to the colonies via the very first European legislature in the New World, the Virginia House of Burgesses. And today, a majority of former British colonies use single-member districts as their method of electing their legislators. In the United States, we ended up standardizing this single-member district model, and we formally put it in federal law in 1967 with the Uniform Congressional Districts Act. The Uniform Congressional Districts Act is a federal law that mandates that states divide their state into equally populated single-member districts for the purposes of elections to the U.S. House of Representatives. It is this law that keeps this system afloat, and it is this law that provides for the current system we have in electing members of our federal House of Representatives. Now, who is affected by this issue? I would say the electorate, the people whose votes are wasted. And when we look at public opinion, we can see that, generally speaking, once they hear a generic explanation about single-member districts and alternatives to single-member districts, they generally support it after hearing that explanation. According to a poll conducted by Citizen Data in 2023, 52% say they support moving to a different system, and only 22% want to keep the current single-member district system. But electoral reform is still very difficult, and we can see that today. Proposals to change our election systems, even if they keep single-member districts like instant runoff voting, have still failed to pass in many states. In 2024, just in this recent election, instant runoff voting measures failed in Oregon. They failed in Nevada, and it's still too close to call on whether it gets repealed in Alaska. So we still have a way to go when it comes to electoral reform, and the people are still wary of change. But when we look at the poll, and the fact that it is currently disenfranchising many people without a representative that they voted for, we can see that change needs to happen. The first necessary reform would be to introduce multi-member districts instead of single-member districts. With larger districts electing multiple representatives, it becomes nearly impossible to draw district lines that consistently favor just one party across all of the seats. It would get rid of the effects of gerrymandering when multiple seats are at stake, as opposed to winner-take-all single-member districts. And that brings me to the second important aspect, which is proportional representation instead of winner-take-all. Proportional representation systems can significantly improve the proportionality of election results. They allow for a more accurate representation of voter preferences, as seats are allocated in proportion to the votes each party or group receives. Minority groups and interests that may not be geographically concentrated enough to win single-member districts can still gain representation if they meet the vote threshold in a multi-member district. And this reduces wasted votes, where supporters of losing candidates in single-member districts have no representation. Nearly everyone will have someone they can talk to that they voted for as their representative. This would reduce polarization, as proportional representation allows for the elections of third-party or independent candidates more easily, breaking the two-party system that currently drives polarization. And research shows that countries with proportional systems have lower levels of both issue-based and identity-based polarization compared to majoritarian systems, such as single-member districts. Now, what needs to happen to get this reform through? Well, you would need to repeal the Uniform Congressional Districts Act that currently sets it up at a federal level to mandate single-member districts. We would have to pass a new federal electoral law to replace it, and there's one that's been proposed. For example, Representative Don Beyer of Virginia has sponsored the Fair Representation Act in the U.S. House, which is a proposed bill that aims to reform the electoral systems for our elections, and it does many things. By implementing proportional representation via ranked choice voting, you would have to have multi-member districts with at least 3 members. You would have redistricting reform, make the Senate elected by ranked choice voting, a variety of different things, but the key element is that multi-member districts and proportional representation. Now, the Fair Representation Act has been introduced multiple times. It was first introduced in 2017, it's been reintroduced in 2019, 2021, and most recently in March 2024, and the latest version has 7 co-sponsors. There are other organizations that are also pushing for proportional representation of this kind. For example, one is Fair Vote. Fair Vote has been instrumental in advocating for electoral reform, especially proportional representation via ranked choice voting. But let's be real, is this actually going to happen? Maybe, maybe not. But we have to look at who actually has power. And that's political parties and lawmakers, who generally oppose electoral reform like this because it would make it harder for them to get reelected. The two major parties, the Democrats and Republicans, oppose it because the current system benefits their dominance in our politics. Minor parties and independent candidates tend to support proportional representation, but they don't have the institutional power that the Democrats and Republicans have, because it would make them succeed less, because it would allow minor parties and independents to do better. Elected lawmakers would have to go in and change the law, and many incumbents and members of the House of Representatives or other legislatures, especially in those safe districts, oppose changing the system that got them elected and keeps getting them elected. Now, state legislatures and local governments also have the power to implement proportional representation at state and local levels. If you want it to be used for your state legislature or for city councils, you can do that through the people. Because at the end, grassroots movements can make this happen. Voters can propose ballot initiatives to change the system at a local level, at a state level, and we can vote in legislators at the federal level supportive of proportional representation. Now, one specific action plan that can further this reform is to contact the people that represent you in government to support the Fair Representation Act and to support proportional representation and to get this through. Do everything you can at all levels, not just federal, to get fair voting in, because if we want the representative democracy to truly be representative, we need to take a stand in favor of accurate, proportional representation in our government. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like or subscribe, or both. We're a new channel, so any amount of support is very helpful. If you're interested in supporting proportional representation in the United States or electoral reform of that kind, feel free to reach out to Fair Vote or go to their website to get more information on how you can make a difference.